Imagine waking up to headlines that could change the course of history overnight. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are set for a direct, high-stakes phone call, one that could ignite the path toward peace in Ukraine or unravel into chaos on a global scale. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on this unprecedented flurry of behind-the-scenes diplomacy, where the fate of more than 40 million Ukrainians, the stability of Europe, and the world's economic future may hang in the balance. But here's the burning question. Are these sudden talks a genuine breakthrough? Or is the world being lulled into yet another illusion of progress, while the roots of war dig deeper into our global order? Let's dive into what's really happening, who's pulling the strings, and why the phone lines between Moscow, Washington, and Europe are crackling with urgency. Flashback to a few days ago, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meet in Rome. It's their first face-to-face encounter since a heated public showdown months ago in Washington. This isn't just routine diplomacy, it's an effort to reboot trust in a relationship battered by war, political differences, and the relentless churn of global news cycles. Just hours after Rome, events begin to snowball. Trump announces via a fiery social media post that he'll call Putin at precisely 10 a.m. Eastern Time. The agenda? Stopping the bloodbath, a reference to the staggering casualty rates, with over 5,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers dying every week. Trump also plans to call Ukrainian leader Zelensky and heavyweight NATO allies across Europe, France, the UK, Germany, and Italy. Can a few hastily arranged phone calls really alter the trajectory of a conflict that has raged unbroken since 2022? Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov confirms that preparations are underway. Across the Atlantic, the White House is abuzz. The last time Trump and Putin spoke, back in March, Russia reportedly halted attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, a fleeting pause in the violence. Yet there was no reciprocal move from Kyiv, and the guns soon roared back to life. Why are world leaders suddenly so eager to talk? Is the war truly reaching a tipping point, or is this a theatrical attempt to buy time or political currency on the world stage? To answer these questions, we need to understand the storm that's been brewing under the surface for decades. The Russia-Ukraine conflict didn't start in a vacuum. Its origins are tangled in centuries of rivalry, power shifts, and the scars of empires past. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine seized its long-denied independence. But to Moscow, Ukraine was never just another neighbor. It was the linchpin to Russia's sense of historical destiny and security. Ukraine's slow pivot towards the West, culminating in bids to join NATO and the EU, was seen in the Kremlin as a red line. As one Russian analyst bluntly put it, for Russia, Ukraine is not just geography, it's identity, security, and the balance of the entire European continent. Diplomacy tried and failed to stop what came next. The Minsk agreements, hammered out between 2014 and 2015, aimed to resolve tensions in eastern Ukraine. But both sides swiftly accused the other of violations. The agreements unraveled, laying the groundwork for the full-scale Russian invasion in February 2022. Since then, the war has not only devastated cities and claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, it's also sent shockwaves through the global economy. Energy prices spiked as pipelines were sabotaged and sanctions bit deep. Germany's economy, for instance, is now projected to contract by 0.4% this year, largely because of energy shortages linked to the conflict. Meanwhile, military analysts warn that the front lines are locked in a deadly stalemate, with neither side able to claim decisive victory. Humanitarian agencies report millions displaced, and the specter of famine and poverty growing in regions far beyond Eastern Europe. The world can no longer afford to ignore the cost of this war, says Dr. Fiona Hill, a former senior advisor at the White House. The latest flurry of diplomacy began when Pope Leo XIV offered the Vatican as a neutral venue for direct Russia-Ukraine peace talks. This unexpected move forced world leaders to respond. European heads of state, Italy, France, Germany, and the UK, quickly joined calls with Trump to coordinate strategy ahead of his conversation with Putin. But despite the optimism, the obstacles remain formidable. At a recent face-to-face in Istanbul, Russian and Ukrainian negotiators agreed to exchange 1,000 prisoners of war. But when it came to a ceasefire, the talks broke down. Russian officials demanded that Ukraine withdraw from all territories claimed by Moscow. For Kyiv, such concessions amount to a surrender of sovereignty, an unacceptable price. Zelensky has made it clear, negotiations must include direct American and European involvement. Otherwise, he warns, Russia could use talks as a smokescreen while consolidating control over occupied regions. Pressure is needed against Russia until they are eager to stop the war, Zelensky posted on social media. urging for tougher sanctions and more advanced weaponry from Western allies. Meanwhile, inside the Kremlin, strategy is shifting. Putin openly thanked Trump for supporting the resumption of direct talks but remains adamant. The main thing for us is to eliminate the root causes of this crisis. The implication is chilling. For Russia, that means solid guarantees Ukraine will never join NATO, and significant influence over its domestic politics. U.S. and European unity is being tested like never before. The U.S. Congress is locked in a bitter debate over a $20 billion aid package for Ukraine, money that could mean the difference between life and death on the battlefield. Some lawmakers warn of fatigue and question how long the West can sustain its massive financial and military support. At the same time, Germany and France, hard hit by the economic fallout from the war, are quietly pushing for a negotiated solution. Work is underway to immediately start negotiations between the parties that can lead to a ceasefire as soon as possible, said a spokesperson for Italy's Prime Minister Meloni, reflecting the growing urgency in European capitals. But not everyone is convinced this is the right moment. General Ben Hodges, former commander of U.S. Army Europe, warns, NATO needs to send a stronger message of deterrence to Russia, or we risk emboldening Putin at a critical juncture. And then there's the shadow of American politics. Dr. Fiona Hill observes, the Trump-Putin call could signal a shift in U.S. policy towards Ukraine. If the U.S. backs off, Ukraine could find itself dangerously isolated. With each phone call and handshake, the stakes are climbing. Will this new burst of diplomacy finally silence the guns, or create opportunities for Russia to press its advantage? Consider the Vatican's offer. On paper, it's a symbol of hope, neutral ground, away from the East-West chessboard. But some question whether a religious institution, even one with the Pope's moral authority, can really broker peace between two militarized, deeply entrenched sides. The involvement of the Vatican could potentially lead to a more comprehensive peace agreement, but its influence is limited, notes a recent research report. Ukraine's leaders, wary of diplomatic traps, insist that any deal must include Western observers and ironclad guarantees. For some, this looks like a lifeline. For others, just another round of empty promises while the front lines remain ablaze. And while the diplomats talk, the reality in Ukraine grows more grim by the hour. Over 5,000 soldiers die every week. Entire cities in the east have been reduced to rubble. Sanctions bite hard, yet Russia's economy has proven more resilient than many Western analysts predicted. Meanwhile, rising food and energy prices are fueling political unrest across Europe and weakening resolve for a long struggle. Here lies the core dilemma. If Ukraine resists Russian demands for territorial concessions, the war could drag on for years, with mounting casualties and economic ruin. But if Kyiv bows to pressure, it risks losing independence and setting a precedent that borders are up for grabs in the 21st century. For the Biden administration and its European partners, the challenge is balancing moral principle with hard political realities. It is crucial the U.S. does not distance itself from the talks, warns Zelensky, or else Russia will dictate the outcome. Amid all this, misinformation floods social media, making it harder for ordinary citizens, and even policymakers, to know what's actually happening on the ground. Is peace really possible, or are we witnessing simply a new phase in a war without end? At the heart of the storm are three possible futures. First, a negotiated ceasefire, possibly involving painful compromises from Ukraine. Can world leaders guarantee that Moscow will honor its commitments? Second, escalation. If talks collapse, Russia could launch new offensives. NATO might be drawn in, sparking a much larger and potentially catastrophic war. Third, a shift in U.S. policy. If American support wavers, Ukraine could be forced to negotiate on Russia's terms, effectively redrawing the map of Europe. As Trump readies to pick up the phone to Putin and European capitals hold their breath, the world waits. Which path will these leaders choose and at what cost? And here's the twist. Even as the phone lines buzz and the headlines scream with optimism, what's really at stake is not just the fate of Ukraine, but the credibility of Western resolve, the future shape of global alliances, and the question of whether the world's superpowers can still prevent catastrophe by talking rather than fighting. Will the next steps carve out a genuine path to peace, or set the stage for an even greater conflict? And what, if anything, will the ordinary people caught in the crossfire gain from this new round of high-powered negotiations? The outcome of Trump and Putin's call could tip the scales. But as the world watches, a single question looms larger than ever. Are we witnessing the beginning of the end, or just another dangerous illusion? Let's look ahead, past today's talking points and diplomatic photo ops. Beyond the handshake moments and press releases, what could these renewed negotiations, crowned by the highly anticipated Trump-Putin call, really mean for the future of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the stability of Europe itself? There are three roads the world could find itself traveling in the coming months, and not all of them are paved with peace. The first, most optimistic scenario, a negotiated ceasefire. Imagine a world where today's talks and those feverish calls between presidents actually lead to a pause in fighting, maybe even a framework for lasting peace. The Vatican's dramatic offer to host talks paints a powerful image. Two bitter enemies, under the gilded domes of Rome, hammering out terms with the glare of the world upon them. But, as the experts caution, even a ceasefire would come with a steep price. Russian negotiators have already demanded that Ukraine pull its troops out of regions claimed by Moscow, essentially forcing Kiev to cede sovereignty over huge swaths of its land. For Ukraine, any plan that rewards military aggression is a bitter pill, one that could fracture domestic support and outrage allies. For Russia, accepting anything less than total victory could be spun as weakness back home. Dr. Fiona Hill of the Brookings Institution warns, a ceasefire can be just a pause to rearm and regroup. Without real compromise, there's a risk of freezing the conflict, not solving it. Still, in this scenario, there could be immediate benefits. The guns would fall silent, tens of thousands of lives would be spared from further violence, and Europe, teetering on the edge of an energy and economic crisis, might finally breathe. Remember, Germany's economy is already projected to shrink thanks to this war. A peace, even a fragile one, could open the door for reconstruction, prisoner exchanges, as recently agreed in Istanbul, and cautious steps toward normalization. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The second path is far darker: escalation. If this latest burst of diplomacy crumbles under the weight of hardline demands, if neither side is willing to swallow its pride or make harsh sacrifices, the war could spiral. Russia has shown it will target energy infrastructure, and Ukraine, faced with existential threat, might strike Russian supply lines or even consider attacks on territory long claimed by Moscow. Some military experts, like General Ben Hodges, warn that NATO needs to send a stronger message of deterrence to Russia or risk drawing the alliance itself into the fight. If the conflict spills across borders, or if a miscalculation leads to attacks on NATO territory, we're not talking about a regional war anymore. We're talking about the kind of escalation that could reshape Europe for a generation, or worse, spark a direct confrontation between nuclear-armed powers. And the third, more subtle scenario, a shift in U.S. policy. Trump's willingness to talk directly to Putin, and his vague suggestions about sanctions and trade, has rattled both Kyiv and European capitals. According to Finnish President Alexander Stubb, only strong U.S.-Europe coordination can avoid a dangerous vacuum. If Washington grows tired of endless aid packages and public support wanes, Ukraine could find itself forced into a deal it doesn't want. That would send a message to autocrats everywhere: aggression pays. But, as with all turning points in history, the outcome isn't set. Unique new players, the Vatican, new European leaders, a U.S. Congress still debating billions in military aid, each add a layer of unpredictability. The secret, little-discussed fact is that the devil isn't just in the details of the negotiation table, but in the shifting public mood across the West. People are exhausted. They want headlines about peace, not endless, grinding war. That pressure will shape leaders' decisions as much as anything said behind closed doors in Moscow, Kiev, or Washington. So, what does all this mean for you? Why should viewers care about the mechanics of diplomatic calls and the chessboard of international leaders? First, this conflict isn't some distant struggle. Its aftershocks ripple into daily life. Energy prices are up, inflation has rattled global markets, and food shortages have struck far beyond Ukraine's borders. If the conflict escalates, or if peace is mishandled, the pain will be felt in every wallet and supermarket aisle. Second, the Russia-Ukraine war is a test case for international order. If smaller countries see that the world shrugs when borders change through force, what's to stop the next crisis? Taiwan, the South China Sea, the Balkans. History shows that weakness in one theater invites chaos elsewhere. Even now, intelligence agencies quietly monitor other hotspots, waiting to see how the world responds in Ukraine. Third, and perhaps most importantly, understanding the forces at play helps inoculate us against manipulation. Propaganda isn't just something other countries do, it's a fog that creeps into all our feeds and news outlets. As new rounds of negotiations are pitched as either historic breakthroughs or cynical stalling tactics, remember, the truth is almost always in between. To cut through that fog, ask yourself, Who benefits if peace talks drag on, with no solution? Whose interests are served if the war continues or escalates? What is being left unsaid in official statements? By staying curious, questioning easy narratives, and demanding accountability from leaders, especially your own, you become a participant in history, not just a spectator. The future of this war and its ripple effects will be shaped by public opinion as much as by generals and diplomats. There's another practical angle, too. With the news cycle moving with such speed, many are tempted to tune out, to let the politicians and pundits hash it out. But the world is entering an era where civic awareness is power. For those in Europe, the consequences are immediate: election results, defense spending, energy policy. For others, understanding the stakes can help you anticipate shifts in the economy, geopolitics, and even social trends, long before they hit home. And finally, for those who feel powerless, remember the lessons of history. Major shifts often begin with small, consistent acts. Staying informed, discussing these issues with friends and family, voting, even sharing credible information online. It all matters. Public pressure moves mountains in democratic societies, even when the odds look grim. So, circling back to our core question, will this new round of diplomacy deliver real progress, or are we staring down the barrel of greater instability? Here's the honest answer, and it might not be the one you expected. The answer is, both paths are still wide open. The next days and weeks will be decisive, but not because of any single phone call or handshake. Instead, the outcome will be shaped by the clash of competing interests, the hard realities of power politics, and the willingness, or exhaustion, of ordinary people and world leaders to keep pushing for a solution. There's a real possibility that recent gestures could unlock the first steps towards peace, especially with creative diplomacy from actors like the Vatican. But without major concessions, or a dramatic shift in either Russian or Ukrainian goals, the most likely path remains a kind of frozen conflict, a situation where the guns fall quiet, but true peace remains elusive. Think Korea, think Cyprus. A wound, not a cure. That might sound discouraging, but here's the secret fact you won't hear on many news channels. Even a fragile, imperfect ceasefire can be a lifeline. Every day the war pauses, lives are saved. Every window for negotiation, even if it ultimately fails, shrinks the risk of a catastrophic wider war. Sometimes in geopolitics, avoiding disaster is a win in itself. But the flip side is clear. If leaders, feeling public apathy or emboldened by perceived weakness, give in to maximalist demands or refuse to compromise, the war could erupt into something far larger. The stakes are immense, for Europe, for world security, for the principle that borders still matter. So as the headlines roll in from Rome, Moscow, Washington, and Kyiv, stay alert. Watch for the subtle shifts: who gains, who loses, and who dares to break ranks. Read between the lines of every statement. And above all, remember that history isn't just made at negotiation tables. It's made by the risks people are willing to take, and sometimes by the fatigue that makes them stop trying. If you found these insights valuable, hit the like button, share this video so more people can understand what's really at stake, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most consequential stories. In a world awash with noise and sweeping narratives, your curiosity is your power. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop asking, what comes next?